This time on Hardware Asylum, the render machine build continues. We've made the required modifications, and it's time to put this guy together. Welcome back to our modding project. This happens to be an HP Pavilion 9040. It's an old PC based off of a Core 2 quad. And what we did is we removed it so that we could make room for an EVGA X99 Micro2 motherboard. That's going to be built on the X99 for lots of cores, lots of power. For that power, we're going to have a massive cooling solution. So we're going to be using a Nipton 140XL from Cooler Master. And I've already made the mods here for the 140mm fan. To get that cooler to fit, we had to cut down the 5 1/4 external bay, which leaves us enough room under here so that we can have a card reader. And I picked a unit from NZXT that will allow us to get data off of our SD cards and plug it directly into this machine so that we can get to rendering as quickly as possible. So the question is, why did I use an HP 9040 when I could just go grab a case off the shelf? Well, the idea is that we're going to be building a stealth mod. So with that mod, you will have this HP old style computer sitting in the corner, and you would never know that it had some X99 power under the hood. When installing an all-in-one water cooling unit or even a DIY with a radiator, there's always the question of how do you install your fans? Do you install them so that the air is coming through the radiator this direction? Or do you reverse the fan and have the air coming through the fan into the radiator this direction? Both of them have their plus and minuses. I prefer the method where the fan is pulling air through the radiator. And what that does is that overcomes the conal effect of the fan where everything comes out at an angle. By doing this, then we have as much surface area as possible for the air reaching the radiator, better cooling effect, and it tends to keep the radiator cleaner. Whereas if you are running the fan in this direction, after about 8 months, there's going to be a lot of caked dirt on the radiator. It's going to clog it up. Now we're going to go ahead and mount the fan. I will have it pulling air through the radiator. I'll have a little side benefit too, whereas it will be our primary intake for the entire chassis. So it's going to be pulling air through the radiator to cool the CPU first, and then pressurizing the case in a kind of a positive air pressure situation to keep the dust down and also move some air through the system to keep hard drives cool and also the VRM on the motherboard. Cooler Master includes these nice shouldered thumb screws that go through the fan, and you can use a screwdriver or your fingers to tighten them down. Cooler Master fans are also rubber mounted, so they don't have to be very tight either. Another thing to remember when you are installing fans on your radiator is, and this is a minor thing, take your fan tail and make sure that it is in line with the hoses coming off the radiator. It'll make the installation a bit cleaner, and you can tuck this away and hide your wires really well. Put the pump block in first. Then we'll slide this up and screw it in place. So you notice as part of the mods, what I did is I left myself about 3 inches of clearance from the top of the case to the top of the drive cage. That would allow the radiator and the fan to fit here and gave us plenty of room to install our bay-mounted NZXT card reader. This has USB 3 ports through a USB 3 header. The card reader itself is a USB 2, which is unfortunate, but it will work great for our purposes. As you can see, our bay-mounted card reader, we have a little bit of a gap in between the bottom of the fan, but it is very open in the back, which will allow us to have plenty of airflow from our radiator coming from the top of the case to pressurize the chassis. We have our Silverstone power supply. It is an SFX-L, which is slightly larger than the standard SFX, in 500 watt gold. Good enough for B-roll. Now we have the top of the case assembled. We have radiator, card reader, and power supply. Now let's work on the bottom. So now that we have most of the system together, I thought I'd give you a quick little tour around. At the bottom we have our pump block installed, surrounded by some HyperX Predator memory. We're reusing the old video card that came out of this system, just because we don't need to have anything other than something to get the system running and for a monitor while we install the OS. At the top we have a Silverstone SFX-L power supply. Here is the 140mm fan and radiator. Below that is the card reader. If it looks like the wires are just kind of hanging out inside the case, there's a good reason for that. This particular chassis does not have any room behind the motherboard tray for any sort of cable management. That makes running the wires a little difficult. However, there's no side window on this box, so the only thing we're really concerned with is airflow. And as long as the air can get from the top of the radiator out the exhaust in the back, that's all we really care about. The final stage of this build is to get our hard drives installed and back inside the case. To do that, we have our rack that was taken out. We'll plug in our two SATA cables. Makes it easy to get them in there. To maintain the stealth nature of this case, we will have to make sure that the front bezel doesn't have any holes. And this is the one drive that we cannot just take the bezel off and glue on, so we're going to reinstall it. The last and final mod that we need to do to our HP Pavilion 9040 to retain that stock look is to figure out how to get air through the top bezel. By default, it comes with this rubber mat, which is going to be blocking our air holes, so we will have to get rid of that. In its place, I propose that we build a custom grill to go over top of it. It will be a slight mod, allow some air to get through, but it will still retain that stock look that will kind of match the stock bezel here. For that, what we need is a mesh that is firm enough that we can shape and open enough to allow air through. And at the local grocery store, believe it or not, there is a Bake Better sheet. What this does is it allows you to put your pizza on top, and it will give you a crisper crust because it can get air into the bottom of the pizza. So what we're going to do is cut it out of this ring, shape it to the top of the bezel, and hopefully have a nice looking grill. Well, through the power of editing and me basically turning the camera off so that I can work on this, I have a final product. This is the mesh piece that will cover the top of the case. If you look straight through, it's fairly open so you can see through to the bottom, but from an angle, which you would normally see if the case was sitting in the corner and you just kind of glanced over, it really fills in the top of this bezel piece. Well, there it is, our finished product. I call this a very simple case mod because we really didn't have to do that much to the chassis aside from allow for the 140mm nipped-in cooler from Cooler Master. The EVGA X99 Micro2 motherboard slid right into place. Being that it was a micro ATX design, exactly the same as what came out of this PC, there was really no question of whether or not it would fit. From the outside, the case looks very stock, just like it did when we first got it. And the only cue that there is something different with this case is the custom grille that I installed at the top to replace that rubber mat, and the EVGA branded AIO shield along the back. I was even able to use the same video card that came with the PC because we really don't need to have anything powerful to run our render machine. We'll be accessing this machine over the network, so the majority of the processing power will happen at the CPU level. Of course, if we wanted to make this a gaming PC, all we would have to do is remove the video card that we just installed and put something like a 1060 or 1050 in this machine to give us a little bit more power and not overstress our power supply. As was mentioned before, the power supply is a 500 watt gold rated from Silverstone. And if we wanted to put in a 750 or an 850, we would just have to upgrade from the SFX-L to something more along the lines in their Strider line, where the power supply is a more traditional size, still modular, and will occupy the same location. If you have any questions about this project, please drop by Hardware Asylum at hardwareasylum.com or write them in the comments below. You can follow us on Twitter at Hardware Asylum or follow us on Facebook. As always, I would love it if you would like, comment, and subscribe, share with your friends, and check back for future videos. Thanks for watching.